Mic 2 is good.
Mic 2, mic 1. Ready? Yeah. It's rolling.
John Wright here, reporting with InfoWars. We are Change, Minnesota. We're breaking a new story here that hasn't been talked about or even reported about really much anywhere. And we're sitting here with one of the men that helped break this story, doing all the research, finding out about this, getting the footage, and getting it up online. Sitting here with the man, Dan Feidt. Dan, what's going on here? What are you guys getting out?
It's really good to be here with you, Sean. I have to say, first off, I was up all last night editing, so I'm incredibly tired, but the thing about it is that the whole story has a bunch of different levels. Essentially, what happened was there's a program called DRE, or Drug Recognition Experts, and they train people in the Minnesota law enforcement community how to recognize people that have different symptoms of different controlled substances. But the problem is that this program was picking people up at the place where Occupy Minneapolis has had a pretty regular presence since April 7th, called PV Plaza. And they've been picking them up in some cases when they're pretty clearly sober, and then people go away for a while, they come back, and they're pretty heavily chemically intoxicated in different ways. They're not being taken care of, and they started telling us stories that they had been given drugs for free. They'd been given incentives to take drugs of different sorts, from cash to cigarettes to food, and handed out pot. They tried to get people to snitch against the Occupy movement. So it was very troubling because it seemed like we'd sort of bumped into a program that was just throwing a lot of chemical intoxication directly into the center of where Occupy Minneapolis is going on. And so a whole team of people went out and got video footage of this at different angles. People went through the program to kind of figure out what was going on with it, and all those pieces really came together. And so I just basically helped in kind of sort of a producer role to help get the segments put together, and then fix the editing, sound levels, all that kind of thing. And we got it out on the internet, a 35-minute, pretty raw, quickly edited documentary. We've only been working on it 5 days, and we got that turned around. And we want people to know about this because this DRE program is a national program, and it seems pretty likely that there's kind of a tip of the iceberg type situation, that this program is going on in other states. They might be using this to try to form informants elsewhere and that type of thing.
How are they getting funding for this DRE? You said drug recognition experts. Yeah. So what I hear about that, it means that the law enforcement is basically learning what effects happen to people on drugs.
Yeah.
So the outside, drill they're running would be to grab people voluntarily,
and they're rewarding them. And see, that's where there's definitely a very unethical level to it, because normally it's in the world of medical studies, you're not supposed to reward people for doing behaviors that are recognized as damaging, right? So if you're offering people anything to get high, whether you're just giving some free weed, which is a fairly dramatic claim that a lot of people made who went through this program, or if they're just giving them cigarettes or whatever, and anything to encourage people to take drugs is really unethical. It would never pass an institutional review board, so there's no oversight ethically or medically protecting the people that were the training subjects in this program. In previous years, the news reports about the program that were out there claimed that they found these people through nonprofit organizations. They were already in treatment. They could be put somewhere safe. But in this case, they were definitely being dumped off on PV Plaza. And that was really affecting the whole atmosphere around this whole Occupy Minneapolis over the past several weeks.
So what I'm gathering is basically they wanted to do a study, and they ran out of test subjects to sign up for this deal. And so they're giving incentive for people off the streets or with protest movements to come in and do a bunch of illegal drugs in a controlled facility, in a government facility.
Yeah, and in some cases, the people that were describing the narratives to us, is obviously we don't have footage of people going through that process at this point, but the idea was that in some cases they were smoking down at this facility, which is a Minnesota Department of Transportation facility at 66th Street and Cedar Avenue on the east side, or so the west side of the Minneapolis International Airport. But they were also, saying, okay, go smoke the joints from the weed that we as police just gave you. Go out to the river and smoke that. That was the kind of stories we were hearing. And
so our police are giving drugs to individuals to test out. Now, have you heard it from your research and from what you've been seeing and hearing testimony from people? That's what you're gathering.
Yes, exactly.
Have you heard of any reports that there would be any EMT or any medical staff there?
Right. Well, one of the deputies, they sort of asserted that officers have EMT training, but that isn't the same as saying you have people that are independent of the law enforcement system looking out for anybody's medical interests, because EMTs, medical personnel, have to abide by a certain code of ethics, and so an experiment of this sort puts them in liability. It's the same kind of reason that psychologists aren't, supposed to be involved in CIA torture sessions, right? Like in an ethical way, it's a very comparable problem. And so that seems to be the reason why they didn't have ambulances there. And that's pretty dangerous to not have an ambulance on the site, which is apparently the case down at this MnDOT facility. If somebody overdosed and had a really bad reaction, you wouldn't have those kind of extra tools on hand that an ambulance has. So I'm really hoping, the program was supposed to resume Thursday, or tomorrow actually, during the afternoon, I think at 3 o'clock. And so we'll see if the program actually starts happening tomorrow. And because it was a major concern. We had to push this video out real quickly because the program was going to start happening again. So the Minneapolis City Council was having a hearing today to try to restrict access to these places overnight, essentially, and say that homeless people can't be there. Me, as a journalist, I couldn't report anything in these spaces after midnight. A religious person can't share their religion. Which is I think one of the more entertaining aspects of late night Nicollet Mall is people preaching. Right? This would illegalize that. It's also a freedom of religion issue as much as it is an Occupy or protest or First Amendment. It's really frustrating. Like the ordinance, if you really look at it, speaks to a real major conflict, which is people that say everything needs to be tight down and corporate and quiet, versus people that are like, we need to live in a lively city. That's what makes our culture and our civilization move forward. And there's a real tension there, and I think that with things like stadiums, with things like the way they want to regulate Occupy in the parks and stuff, and the way that they want to surveil everyone to advance the war on drugs more broadly, it all ties together as part of sort of a related complex that I think a lot of people see as threatening,
Less than a month ago, we saw 12 plus people getting arrested for marching down the street. And during that whole time, what really irritated me was that the police and all the law enforcement were targeting people with cameras.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really bad when they start coming down on people that are trying to document events and trying to get people on record for their actions to hold them accountable.
Right. And then what's interesting about this case now is that the police were clearly uncomfortable with the idea of being filmed. The videographers that put this together and really put themselves at a lot of risk to get this all sorted out in the front line, there was a real concern with them because the cops kept saying, don't record us, don't record us. And so you could sense from that a sense of guilt kind of coming off of them, that they themselves recognized that what was going on was really dubious and extra shady, and that's why they didn't want it filmed. And so part of their tension with not wanting people filmed is there's a psychological conflict there, going on within the minds of the officers repressing the media.
The conscience starts to kick in a little bit and started thinking, whoa, I don't want my children and my wife or my family seeing what I'm doing here.
Exactly.
I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution.
And what we found, people said that they were asked for information. It seemed like in some ways it was kind of an exercise or a trial run, like this is how you question people, this is how you try to learn how to control people using drugs. It seems like that's sort of what the DRE training was kind of hinting at or leading people towards. It just seemed like that was very sketchy undertone to all of that going on from multiple people's first-person accounts. So it's real sketchy. And I think what I also want to say is if this is all a very broad program, and so people could find evidence of DRE or similar types of programs happening in their own communities. That's the one thing people really need to do, and we are change type folks definitely need to have a real opportunity to spread out and get a handle on this. So I think it's a great opportunity for everybody to find a real story on this.
What are some things people can do to start noticing these behaviors in their own communities? I mean, you were part with the Occupy movement here, but say anybody else that wants to go out and try to cover this type of story, what are some of the indicators they should be looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's if you really are going to have a good feel for people that are for example, plants that have just shown up, you have to kind of know who the regulars are, and if there's a certain tension, if somebody's showing up out of the blue. And so we saw people like that at May Day that were acting really strange. They couldn't answer really obvious questions. They gave strange answers to things. But it's hard to do that unless you have a comfort level with kind of the setting that you're in. So that's one thing. And then in this case, when a bunch of sheriffs start showing up from across the state and everybody says that they're getting high with them, that's a pretty good flag in this particular case, right?
Did you hear if any other drugs or alcohol or things were given, or was it mostly just a marijuana test?
The thing is, we found the regulatory paperwork for signing waivers for an alcohol sort of side to this. They wanted to show, I think, to train officers, like this is different, what different blood alcohol dosages look like, you know, like in terms of physical signs, right? So those waivers might exist, but they never had waivers for the drug side of this, at least no waivers we could find. So I think, and the other thing too is that they were definitely taking urinalysis samples, and it seems like the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is part of the department, yeah, BCA, part of the Department of Public Safety,
Right.
like the state troopers are, they were going to measure the urine samples to see if the diagnoses were correct that the officers made. So there's urine floating around that's not associated to waivers in the system, and so I think they have to like ditch that right now or whatever. So now they got a lot of pee on their hands. That's a political liability, I think. I think so. Like, you know, it's all super sketchy. They broke the rules.
Dan, with your history, you're very involved with local and state, city government. You know, what other types of laws have you observed being passed through? What types of things have you sat in to try to stop? That's where I want to get. You've been very active.
The law enforcement efforts to expand tracking, punishment, that sort of thing, didn't get a lot of media coverage. And so I was able to dive in and give some detail to things that they were trying to maneuver together in relative secrecy through the legislature. And then by doing stories on that, I was able to get some more publicity to happen around that, and then those things didn't start happening. So that's something I've followed for a long time. And a few weeks ago, essentially the descendant of a bill that I've been following for years, they really didn't want me to hand out any handouts during the discussion of that bill. And they almost threatened to basically throw me out of the building if I was trying to give handouts to the committee members.
And you challenged them there to present facts to you. What can you elaborate what that was about?
Well, it was frustrating because essentially it was a very closed process going on. Like they were trying to put through. Well, they were trying to do a lot of things, but they were trying to make it so that they could permanently track people. If they inferred that you might possibly commit a crime in the future, they could track all of your personal information. It's something they've been gunning at for a long, long time. And so by getting the word out about that, I was able to, over quite a while, raise awareness of the issue because nobody else was writing about it. And so that's a good example of the kind of thing that a relatively small amount of group of people blocking really shady bills like that. So you can do that and get out there in front of those bills, publicize that shit, and make sure word gets around.
So did that law get passed?
No, I think it's dead at the legislature this year. Like so there's been a lot of good luck.
Well, thank you, Dan, for being able to stop a bill from coming out that would infringe upon more of our rights.
I mean, honestly, it's like I'm just somebody who like usually gets some good tips on things and then tries to get the word out about them. Like it's like I'm not a lot of times I'm not the person who like actually gets the good footage or gets the direct tip that something is going down. But we can all work together on these things regardless of our political leanings and get a lot of stuff done. If people just sort of get the word around, you can make a huge difference.
We all work on our strengths, and then that's how good things happen. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
You've done some of the most incredible research, and you're one of the most researched people when it comes to the laws, especially with the state and city levels. I commend you and thank you for all the work you're doing.
Yeah, it was good luck that I had the job at Politics in Minnesota, where I had editorial latitude to spend some substantial time following up on that, and people had to answer my questions.
One other thing, I know it's getting late and it's been a long day here for you. I would like to ask you about the CISPA bill that they just pushed through last Thursday. If that gets through the Senate, the president doesn't veto it, what is the first thing that you think that they're going to target?
That's a very good question. One thing I found recently was that they're creating a new agency inside the Department of Homeland Security called Homeland Security Investigations, which is currently part of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And that group not only is getting into stuff with drugs, hackers, you name it, border stuff. They have these giant, crazy SWAT trucks that they're putting out all over the country. It's really pretty wild. They have big helicopters, and every satirical police state thing you can imagine appears to be going into this new HSI agency. And they're also really bent on intellectual property and like raiding people for making illegal NBA jerseys that are off copyright and stuff. So I think you'll continue to see the militarization of copyright and like going after internet people for distributing things. I expect more of that from guys like that. That's what I would say for sure.
So a lot more than just the in front of our faces police state of they're kicking in our doors. Now they're hijacking our lives without even our knowledge and violating. I mean, a lot of people enter these contracts with service providers, ISPs, because they do guarantee a sense of safety and a sense of security.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the internet is a giant spying machine, as John Young on Cryptome.org says, and he's right about that. The one thing I would please advise everybody is use encrypted OTR messaging If you're on a Mac, you can use a program called Adium, and if you're on Windows or Linux, you can use one called Pigeon. And like at least that like
bring it down to simple terms.
Well, here's the simple.
OTRs,
Okay, right. So the government listens to all the internet routers, right? So if you chat with the person on another computer and it's not scrambled, the router sees the exact text of what you sent. But if you use encrypted OTR chat, they can sort of tell that they can tell you were talking to each other, but they can't easily tell the content of it. And that's why the NSA is having to build a new data center in Utah and another like new place at like the Oak Ridge National Laboratory just to decrypt everybody's messages because people are starting to scramble them more.
You know, why do people really need to care about what's going on? I mean,
well,
it's not the worst country there is. We should be proud and happy to be Americans.
Well, the thing is, like, we're in an economic situation where it's like a one constant man-in-the-middle attack to extract equity from everybody. You know, and it's like, and I've tried to advocate this to everybody that things aren't going to get better unless we keep getting at fractional reserve banking and, you know, the entrenched, like, financial crime that people don't want to deal with at the state or county level, like, directly at all. I tried to make the case of the city council that like part of the reason people are so pissed and part of the reason they're involved in Occupy Wall Street is because of financial crime and because, in particular, in the Minnesota context, Wells Fargo launders billions of dollars of drug money through their subsidiary Wachovia, which has been pretty well publicized. But we also have a Federal Reserve Bank, and I've even asked people at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, like, can you investigate like how money moves through the Federal Reserve, right? Like, because if people are laundering drug money through wire transfer payments, right? Like you as investigators at the state level would be able to need to get into that computer system. And they're like, no, we can't get in the Federal Reserve, you know? So everybody like pretends like they can't get to these institutions at the state level, you know? That's why we need like open elections for sheriffs. So the sheriff can like impound all the Federal Reserve computers, you know? Like something like that would be awesome.
Who's the most powerful person in the county?
That's a good question. There's a lot of like, yeah, right. All right. I've freaked out more people in the county than anybody else tonight, probably, right? But like, in a weird like constitutional sense, at the county level, the sheriff has a ton of power. The county attorney have a ton of power. If people wanted to stand it up to like the fraudulent conveyance of mortgages and fraudulent foreclosure, you need people at the sheriff level to resist that kind of corruption, right? And I think that's an important avenue that people should pursue if they can, but it's not like the DFL does anything about that in Hennepin County. The thing is, like, I think a lot of people in Occupy would say that it's important that other folks challenge the categories that you're living in. Like, it's not necessarily that, like, wealth is created in these ways like it is right now for reasons that are like intrinsically organic to the whole reality of the universe necessarily, right? There's a lot of different ways we could run this whole world. There's a lot of different ways we could challenge the categories that we're operating within, and there's always another like level of weirdness to everything. I'm always surprised how much weirder everything is. Once you start turning over a few rocks, you find really big shady systems going on. But I think that personally, what I've seen work in Occupy is like when we bring those things out in the open, you can really shift where people are thinking in a real constructive way. And I think that's where you see a lot of progress going on. I would say I definitely had like a funny, like unique role in the whole thing since it started, you know, like in really like random ways. You know, and I should point out to, you know, the change type guys, like the FBI put Cebu on the internet relay chat channel that I set up, which was the original chat channel for Occupy Wall Street. The FBI went whoop and put their guys right in there. So you got to watch out for agents. I think everybody at Occupy would like say that to everybody, but also the thing about interpreting weird stuff and shadiness is everybody's like trapped in kind of a web of power in different ways, and we all act along it in different ways. We all start with certain pre-assumptions just because we're like stuck in a web of power. So when we see things like this shady drug program where they're trying to turn people into informants, the reason that they're in the position of being able to turn them into informants is because those people were already caught in the web of power in a certain bad spot, right? And so if you can look in the kind of that totality of it, you know, then you can get a little more clarity about how the system works as a whole, which is sort of a hazy statement, but you get what I mean. Like, it's easy to say, these are binaries. Like, they're the 1%, we're the 99%. They're in the Bilderberg Conference and we're not. You know, they're Freemasons and we're not, right? There's a ton of that stuff out there, you know, and it definitely explains like a lot of funny things about group behavior. But still, everybody's caught in this network, and you can try to pull on different like strings of it. And I think with Occupy, it's like a lot of people just sort of exchanging along that power network kind of subvert the way that it usually works. And like when Occupy is really clicking, like that kind of exchange happens at a really frequent, like quick level that's faster than the nasty old line authoritarian structures are used to dealing with. And so you can kind of get ahead of them. So when Occupy is working well, that's what works. But it doesn't necessarily have to be an Occupy thing. It doesn't have to be something that people have a lot of ideological prepositioned things to buy into. It's a good way to operate. So
like within any movement, we all got to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Because we're out representing the masses. I mean, if we're going out
Right.
and I'm saying I want this because I'm part of this group, which is speaking on the behalf of the larger population, and we're going out and acting radical cries and chaos, doing anarchistic type of, activities, putting bandanas on our faces, disrespecting officers. I mean, that's going to give them more incentive to show the people that they should be condemned and that the government should be stepping in and keeping us more safe.
Yeah, well,
it's creating more of a terror threat. Everybody's already into terror threat. They're
right.
scared.
Yes. Well, and one thing is the FBI definitely considers the word direct action to be an equivalent phrase to we are plotting terrorism, basically. So when we spy on you and add you to the terror watch list, we can claim statistical accomplishments for tracking you. And like that's like an FBI sort of Midwestern police state system that's evolved. And so when you start looking through documents, you can really see that the way that they rationalize tracking people is like, well, you're edgy, you use words like direct action, we're going to start tracking you. That's a big system going on, right? But overall, it's like here in Minnesota, we went through the 2008 Republican National Convention, and the kind of debate.
Off the hook.
But yeah, it was off the hook, and the kind of debate you're talking about, like it gets right to the issues that were like, the big political conflict around that. But the key,
undercover officers coming out and acting as anarchists.
Well, right. You had a number of provocateurs. Like I ended up running into at least 4 different FBI operatives through the course of all the RNC things. So it was pretty heavily packed with operatives, right? But like, but the thing about that was like, that happened also like right as the entire economy like turned south because of a huge system of financial crime. So even when, the hypothetical bad wildcat protester breaks a bank window, okay, chances are that like in terms of the assets of that person's family, they fell in value a much higher amount than that bank window because the system runs on fraud, and but fraud and financial crime aren't spectacular, but when a protester does something dramatic at a protest, that's spectacular. And so the system says, that's a spectacle. You need to react dramatically to it in one way or another and just ignore the much larger amount of damage that's much more harder to see, And that's the equation, right, that we have to like look for. And so, when protests like get wild or whatever, you always have to try to like keep it in perspective as to like what are the actual damaging institutions in this community and how much are they damaging everything.
How much is started by the cop intervention and how
right.
much is started by the else. I mean, I saw the footage as well as most people with the Oakland Occupy, where everybody's marching down the street, or even back to where the police officer, the BART cop that shot and killed a guy. They had many demonstrations and marches against that.
Yeah.
You can see in those pieces of film as well, everybody's marching, being peaceful, chanting, showing their opposition, not being violent, not creating any chaos. You have one person through the crowd, comes through, breaks a window, and is gone, out of view. Next thing you know, it starts, it's a chain reaction.
Well, and the face of American policing has really changed really dramatically in the last 15 or 20 years, and we should really bring it back finally to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is the main essentially trade association for authoritarianism. A friend of mine describes them as, pretty classic, like globalist gun grabbers. Like the IACP is a perfect example of an organization like that. They are the people that worked diligently for many years to get all the fusion centers set up. They're creating a new type of total information awareness called the National Information Exchange Model, or NIEM, which turns everything about you into XML data to be moved back and forth between Microsoft SharePoint databases. And they also are the people that created this entire DRE program and rolled it out across the country. So the IACP is a great example of a real aggressive, creeping authoritarianism, and they are the people that have been holding the conferences and kind of getting the grants out there and the wheels turned to push the hardware of the military-industrial complex into local communities that would never actually want to spend money on stuff like that and never want to actually treat people that way. So they have the programs like the DRE that dehumanize people and put them at risk, and teach police officers to treat people like objects in this aggressive and corrupt and dehumanizing war on drugs. And so the IACP is just a great example of that type of force. And if there's a subject that I hope people can really dive into, it's like, you know, getting your municipalities to pull out of organizations like the IACP and disavow them and find some alternative. That would be a great step forward. That would highlight this, and that would be something that I would think a large number of people could unite behind if they truly understood the agenda of this group. So
we're going to have to get kind of wrapped up here, but we definitely are going to put some links into some things to definitely get some people informed how to devoluntarize, that's not even a word, but get themselves unenrolled in these programs.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely need to keep continuing to inform people. Thank you, Dan, for all your research, all your work. You're a real patriot. If you haven't seen him yet, it's Dan Feidt, real American hero. This guy's out there putting it on the line every day.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you tonight, and I hope I wasn't too tired. But it's an important subject, no matter what your standpoint is. And with this whole story, there's a bunch of different layers, and there's local angles everyone can explore. So I hope people get out there and do that.
So everybody needs to get involved, get informed, and stand up and provide action.
Yeah. Get out there and just put out all the information you can, because you start finding these little clues, and then a large thing like clicks into place. Anybody can do it. It's not that hard.
Pieces of the puzzle.